You hear me talking about this in a very excited way because I'm a scientist and I love discovery, and we are discovering more about the healthy parts of our body fat, how to tame our body fat using food, using metabolism, using fasting.
Dr. Lee, weight loss is a common topic for this show, but reading your new book, having you back on the show today, we're going to get into that in a whole new realm because typically it comes up in the realm of intermittent fasting, cutting back calories, and you're talking about it at least partially from the aspect of adding these foods in that are going to help fight obesity. So let's start by talking about some of those top foods in that category.
Before we dive into the foods, let me kind of reframe the entire dialogue about the whole narrative about weight loss. Most people think about weight loss from the perspective of what they can see with their eyes and, influenced by vanity, which I think is important. People need to feel good, and if they look good, they feel good. But that's not the real reason to combat body fat. And that's really where the new science of the metabolism teaches us that there are ways that we can actually use the hardwiring systems in our body around our metabolism. This is our operating system in order to be able to achieve the goal of inner health, so we can fight body fat on the inside as well as the outside. And there's ways of doing it that leverage when to eat and how to eat. Intermittent fasting is part of that story. But the real surprise is that there are actually foods that can actually turn on our metabolism and use our fat, so we can eat foods to trigger our fat, our good fat, to burn down our bad fat at the level of the harmful fat. That's really the new angle on this, which is that we can elevate our health by elevating our metabolism. And to do that, we can actually eat food.
And this is what I wanted to get into because usually it comes from the aspect of taking away, whether it be, again, intermittent fasting, where we're going to take away a time period that we're eating during the day, cutting back on carbohydrates, cutting back on calories. And this is why this is so exciting. I'm excited to get into this with you today because you're talking about adding things in. And we know there's, a lot of people these days that are struggling with extra weight on their bodies. And they've tried a lot of the classical ways to lose weight without success, or at least, going back and forth and losing weight and then gaining weight again. So it's exciting to bring this fresh perspective that you're going to bring today, where we're going to talk about adding foods in and give people a different way of going about losing that weight.
Right. Well, what led me to write my new book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, is exactly what you said. I've personally been, as a doctor and as a scientist, been very frustrated with the fact that many of my patients are on diets, and they ask me which diet they should be on. Regardless, it's almost like no matter what diet you choose, they are all about elimination, deprivation, scarcity, removing things from your diet. And it becomes very difficult. The more extreme it is, the more difficult it is for people to stick to. So then they rebound and they wind up weight cycling up and down and up and down. And at the end of the day, they gain back everything they wanted to lose, sometimes more. And then they're very frustrated because they feel like they've been deprived. Well, here's the deal. Human nature abhors deprivation, right? So when somebody tells you not to do something, you can't do something, or something is bad to do, our brains are hardwired to go, maybe just a little bit, or let me see if I can sneak around the side, or, you just kind of build up that resentment of actually having something taken away from you. I think that's part of our nature, is to really have that freedom of choice. Well, so what I try to do in my book is to use the new science of the metabolism to upend this idea that you have to use elimination in order to be able to achieve health goals related to your metabolism. So there's three components, by the way, that allow us to actually re-examine, reconceptualize how foods can be used to lose weight in a healthy way. All right, this is the key, healthy way. So there's the new science of the metabolism. There is the new science of food. And then there is actually the practical aspect of how we actually put it all together in a way that allows us to embrace and rediscover the joy of eating, as opposed to the fear of food because of what it can actually do to our body weight.
Well, there's a lot of different ways we can jump in and get to the nuances here. But let's come back to the opening question again, because we haven't gotten into specifics yet. Let's give a couple of foods to start off, and then we can pivot off there and talk about what's happening. So what are a couple of the top foods for somebody just getting started that they want to add in when it comes to helping them lose weight and burn fat?
All right, let me just throw a couple of foods out there that might be surprising as foods that can turn on our fuel burning, fat fighting processes that are hardwired in our bodies, things that you might not expect. Number one, beans. Canned beans, pre-cooked beans, ready-to-eat beans, dried beans you want to soak. It turns out that beans have been studied for their ability to actually help fight body fat. And not only does it work in the laboratory, but it works in people as well. So human studies have been done to show that people who eat as little as a cup of pre-cooked, ready-to-eat beans, like the stuff you get in a can in the grocery store, does not have to be expensive. 5 days of the week, 5 days out of 7, okay, is enough to actually shrink your waist size. That's how round the tube of your body is. We're not talking about the muffin. We're talking about actually how big your body circumference is by about an inch after a month. And the reason that works is because beans have dietary fiber that actually make our gut healthier. And as our gut health, our microbiome improves, it actually upregulates it. It levels up our metabolism to burn fat better. So that's one example of a surprise food. Another one, which by the way you could find in the middle aisle like beans, are chili flakes, the stuff that you put on pizza. All right, or dried chili, the dried ancho chili, poblano chilies that you can find by the dried section in the grocery store. Or of course, fresh chilies. You want to actually, eat some Thai food with some nice, serrano chilies. That also works. And here's actually what's been found: chili peppers give some zing to your body. That's the spiciness. And we now know that zing is caused by this natural chemical in peppers called capsaicin, and also capsainoids. It's kind of a class of natural chemicals. One of the things that people have loved spicy food for is that it actually creates this nice flavor sensory reaction. The capsaicin is what does it. Binds to a special taste receptor, kind of receptor on your tongue, the spicy receptor. There's a name for it. It's called TRPV1. Don't worry about memorizing that. Just know that the natural chemical in peppers is like a key, and on your tongue is a lock, and it goes key and lock, turn, bam, you actually have that spicy zing, right? Now, the key thing that is really exciting is that when the key goes into the lock, that hot, spicy flavor of chili touches your tongue, you do feel that spicy flavor. What your tongue does, that receptor, that lock does is text messages your brain, and it tells your brain to release hormones. One of the hormones that it actually releases is endorphin. So that's the feel-good hormone. That's why some people are really addicted to spicy food. By the way, the other hormone it actually releases is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is this special hormone that we use when we want to get pumped up, like fight or flight. You want to square off against somebody. All right, you got your norepinephrine like flowing, right? And the other thing that happens, and next time you eat chili, hot peppers, anything spicy, do this. Kind of go into your meditative zone and like close your eyes and feel after the zing. You will actually feel this wave going down from your head, down the side of your neck. Like literally, it's like a little tingling sensation. That is the norepinephrine coursing down the nerves around your neck. And this is where a special kind of fat, good fat, useful fat, hero fat, called brown fat, is located. Now, brown fat isn't jiggly. That's called white fat. White fat is what you have under the arm, under the chin. It's the muffin top. It's around your thighs and your butt. That's what actually most people are trying to get rid of. White fat is unsightly, but not as dangerous as visceral fat, which is packed around our guts, inside our body cavity. That's dangerous because it's like a baseball glove that like strangles our organs and becomes inflamed. All right. So what brown fat is, which is the other kind of fat, is a hero fat, is not wiggly and jiggly. It's not lumpy bumpy. And it's not under the skin, so you can't see it. It's paper thin. All right. It's like opening some printer paper and pulling it out, and instead of white paper, it's brown paper. And where's it located, that fat? It's close to the bone. And it's around our neck, under our chest, a little bit under our arms, like a girdle, a little bit between our shoulder blades, and then a bit in our belly. When the chili peppers text message to our brain, releases that norepinephrine hormone that travels down the nerves around our neck and activates our brown fat. It's like turning on the light switch of the brown fat. You know what it does? It triggers fuel burning. Like that brown fat becomes a space heater. All right, I have something here to show you guys. Space heater like this. This is a little torch. Boom. All right, that's what chili pepper does in your brain. It goes down and triggers this kind of space heating burning. Now, where does that fuel come from? In your brown fat. It's got to burn fuel. It's burning energy. It draws that fuel from your harmful visceral fat. Good fat burns down bad fat when you eat certain foods. That's pretty cool. That's chili peppers and spicy foods. That can actually do it as well. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables and legumes and seeds that can actually do the same thing. Olive oil, other things you can find in the middle aisles, and also seafoods. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things and beverages. And I write about all of this stuff in the middle of my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, is really a tour of the grocery store, the ordinary, everyday grocery store. I invite my reader to hop into my grocery cart like you used to do when you were a kid in your mom's grocery cart. And I wheel you around and show you everything you actually put in the cart that can activate your metabolism and help your good fat burn down your bad fat.
All right, a lot I want to get into there, but where I'll start is with the brown fat. So we're activating brown fat. You mentioned the fact that what that does when it's activated, it starts burning the bad visceral fat. My question is, does it affect the subcutaneous white fat, which is also considered a bad fat, or is it just the visceral fat?
All types of fat, but the key benefits, the most important health benefits you get is when it actually draws down on the visceral fat. So it'll actually shrink your waistline. You'll lose weight. Your overall fat will actually start to shrink a bit. You'll get the benefit for your subcutaneous visible fat as well. But the invisible part is really what I want to draw attention to, because that's the stuff that even skinny people have. A lot of people don't realize that this harmful white fat is both visible as well as invisible. The visible part is stuff that's lumpy, bumpy. Invisible stuff's packed in your body, and it doesn't matter if you have a big body frame or if you're rail thin. You can still have skinny fat. In fact, that's what they call it. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside. It's that kind of dangerous fat. So think about fat. Like, this is really the other thing that I think is so amazing about this new approach to thinking about metabolism and body fat. We used to assume, we think about fat really as sort of a negative substance, right? Think about it. We all walked out of the shower in the morning naked, and out of the corner of our eye, we see our reflection in the mirror. And almost all of us, myself included, have seen from time to time lumps and bumps that you don't want to be there, right? So immediately go, oh man, I'm getting fat. And it sends a negative signal. So then the next thing you do, I got to get in shape. I got to eat better. Next thing you do is step on the scale. And if that number isn't what you're expecting to be, you're disappointed and you kind of curse yourself, right? So right from the get-go, as adults, we're assuming a very negative posture when it comes to body fat. But as a researcher, I'm a scientist. And as a researcher, one of the things that we like to do as scientists is to explore the origins of something. And the origins of fat, most people don't think about. Like, we think about it when we actually step out of the shower, but we don't think about where fat came from. And it turns out fat in our bodies started to form when we were still in our mom's womb. All right. So we began having fat long before we had a face we could stuff with food. So then the question is like, well, why is fat important? Why is it forming so early? And this is what's really interesting. When your mom's egg met your dad's sperm, turned into a ball of cells, and that ball of cells started to transform itself to become the future you. The first tissue that gets laid down is your circulation, because every organ that forms is going to need a blood supply. The second tissue that forms are nerves, because every organ is going to need really a wiring to actually instruct it what to do. The third tissue that forms is body fat. Fat cells, little tiny globules of fat cells, which are actually fuel tanks for energy, form. And you know where they form? They form around blood vessels like bubble wrap, wrapped around every blood vessel. Now, why is that? It turns out that makes total sense, because ultimately when we have energy from our food that we eat, that energy goes into our bloodstream, right? And then when we want to store that energy for use later, are the energy comes from the bloodstream and it gets stored into these little fat cells. So fat at that level is really just a fuel tank. One of the many things fat does is a fuel tank. You store energy in it. So fast forward to 9 months, you're born, right? Fat figured adults might not be the most pleasing thing that you would see in a mirror, but when you see a healthy baby, a fat, pudgy, chubby baby is the cutest, healthiest thing you've ever seen. Fat, chubby cheeks, round belly, arms and legs that look like a balloon that the clown twists in the circus to make little toy poodles. All right. A fat baby is a healthy baby, right? So this is like a completely different, kind of a jarring appreciation of like when we first see fat on the human, it's associated with health. In fact, if you saw a baby, a newborn who had chiseled cheekbones, thin arms, and long, thin thighs like a runway model, you'd be freaked out. You would say there's something seriously wrong with that baby, and you'd be right. And so this actually is to think about what does fat actually do? I told you it's a fuel tank. Very, very important because energy has to be stored every single day to power us. Anybody who's watching this, listening to this, is using fuel just to be alive and to pay attention. Number two, fat is a cushion. It's not a layer of blubber like in a whale. It's actually a cushion. And the cushion in our body protects our organs. So if you didn't have body fat, you tripped on the rug and you fell on the ground, your organs would split open. All right. Thank goodness we have some protective cushioning fat. The third thing that I talked about in my book that is a bit of a surprise is that fat is now recognized as a normal, healthy organ in the body. An organ just like your pancreas, your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, your heart. Fat is an organ, and not just any organ. It's an endocrine organ, which means that it's an organ that secretes hormones. Now, one of the things I write about in Eat to Beat Your Diet is that there's at least 13 hormones that have been identified that fat makes. Normal, healthy hormones that our fat makes. Just like your testicles and just like your thyroid and just like your ovaries make hormones, our fat makes normal hormones. 3 of them turn out to be super, super important when it comes to our health and maintaining good body composition, meaning regulating our body fat while giving us energy. One of those hormones is called leptin, Leptin, and many people have heard of leptin, okay? Sometimes known as a satiety hormone. It regulates your appetite. When you have more leptin, you're less hungry. I would actually encourage you to think about leptin as a volume switch. It turns up and can turn down your appetite in your brain. And that's really important so we know when we're actually going to want to eat something, right? So think about it. If our body is like a car, most people, have driven a car. In a car, you've got an engine. You need fuel to run that engine. And in a car, you look at the fuel gauge. When the fuel gauge runs low, you want to pull over to the filling station and put that nozzle from the gas pump at the filling station into the gas tank to fill it up. In our bodies, that's basically when we're running low on fuel. Our fuel gauge goes, oh, gotta load up. Leptin goes down. That's like our fuel tank, our fuel gauge. We pull over, not to the gas station, but to the dinner table, to the refrigerator, to the pantry. And then we fuel up with food. So just like gasoline at a filling station is fuel for your car's engine, food that we eat is fuel for our body that gets into our bloodstream and that then gets loaded into our tiny little fat cells as a way of storing that energy. All right. And so that's one of these 3 hormones that are really, really important. Important for metabolism, normal, healthy metabolism. It's made by body fat as an organ. Second hormone that's really important is if I were to, as a doctor, take a vial of blood, after a medical visit with you, Jesse, and send it to an ordinary hospital laboratory. Okay. And I asked, as a doctor, for the lab to actually give me a profile of all the hormones that are in your blood. All right. Testosterone and thyroid hormone, all the usual players, cortisol. I will tell you there's one hormone called adiponectin. Adiponectin is made by adipose tissue, which is fat. Adiponectin is the second fat hormone. That level, your level, would be 1,000 times higher in your blood than any other hormone. Higher than testosterone, higher than thyroid hormone, all the stuff we get concerned about, right? You talk about it, People are interested in, like, what about hypothyroidism and that. I can tell you, adiponectin is 1,000 times higher. Now, why is it so high? Why is this, sort of like at an order of magnitude, several orders of magnitude higher than every other hormone? Because adiponectin, created by fat for normal health, helps your body's insulin, which is another hormone made by your pancreas, to draw in that energy that comes from food from your bloodstream into your cells. You need adiponectin for your insulin to work. And when your adiponectin is messed up, which can happen when you've got too much body fat, okay, it's not working right. Now your insulin's not working well, so you're not even absorbing the energy, and your blood sugars are going to go up. So that's a normal hormone that your fat makes. Second one. Third one is called resistin. Now, the adiponectin, the fuel storing hormone, is the gas pedal. Resistin is the brake. Adiponectin is, I store that energy. The resistin, not so hard, not so fast. It counters it, all right? These three hormones are all part of normal function. That's how we can get out of bed in the morning. That's how we can go take a walk. That's how we can actually, pet our dog. All those things are regulated for normal energy, normal function, normal living, normal aging by our body fat. So the interesting thing is our fat is an organ, and the fourth thing that fat does, again, is to serve at that space heater, this torch. All right. And that's the big surprise, because until recently, we kind of just referred to brown fat as this thing that animals have when they hibernate, and maybe babies have a little bit. Recently, you've seen like the fitness and bodybuilding community talk more and more about brown fat. You see that stuff on the internet. I can give you the scientists and the physicians, the medical doctors' view on it. It's real. It works. And the amazing thing is that there are foods that we can eat, like the chili peppers, like the beans, like broccoli and other brassica vegetables, like capers, like green tea, like coffee, that activate that space heater function. And when you turn on the space heater, it needs fuel to burn, to make energy, to make heat. And where does that fuel come from? Guess what? It steals that fuel. The brown fat uses the fuel from the white fat. So good fat burns down bad fat, and that raises your metabolism.
All right, a lot there. And I want to stick on this brown fat piece here for a bit. So we know we can activate brown fat. It's going to burn the bad fats. So we know now there's these specific foods, and chili peppers are one of them, that can do that. Is it all about activating our current brown fat, or can we make more of that given it's a good thing? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so that's the amazing thing. Our fat has this incredible regenerative capacity, meaning that there are actual stem cells in our normal healthy fat. In fact, we have a name for them. They're not called fat stem cells. They're called adipose stromal cells, or ASCs. Now, as a scientist that's been working on medical research to develop new treatments for heart disease and other diseases where we want to regenerate organs in the body, we've been looking at these stem cells that are found in body fat for a long time. And I can tell you in my book, I write about how powerful these stem cells in body fat are. So what do stem cells in body fat do? Well, remember I told you body fat actually are fuel tanks. When you actually need to store fuel, it can actually fill up what you got from birth. But if you've got more fuel, all right, if you overeat, your body needs to make another fuel tank. And so it can actually just use a stem cell to make another fat cell. Oh, you overate, you really overate. You had third helpings and fourth helpings. Your fuel tank's not enough. Now you got to make more fuel tanks, more fat, more fat, more fat. This is how, when you overeat, your body responds by making more fuel containers. It'd be like, like a car. You just keep on making more and more fuel tanks. Pretty soon you got jerry cans all around the side of your pickup truck, all packed with gas. And that's basically our body's ability to do that using stem cells. Now, here's the key thing. Our stem cells in fat are very, very powerful. It reflects how important our ability to regenerate actually is. It's a health defense system. It allows us to make more organs that are injured, make more fuel tanks. But here's the thing. Before we talk about like the foods that can cause stem cells in fat and harmful fat to create more brown fat, which is what you want to do. You want more hero fat. You want more of that fat burning fat. All right. But let me just tell you how powerful these stem cells are. I write about this in my book. We've been doing research for about a decade now, a little bit more, seeing if we can actually take people who have excess body fat and you use liposuction, which is what plastic surgeons do. It's like a little vacuum cleaner hose, and you suck out body fat, and you get a jar of body fat. It's like this yellow gunk, and what you do is you pour in a little enzyme, all right, and the enzyme dissolves up the fat, separates the cells, and then you put it into a centrifuge. It spins it around, round and around and around, faster and faster. And what happens is the stem cells go to the bottom, and the fat floats to the top. And then, as a researcher, we pour off the fat. Now, what's really interesting, and this is what's been going on for about a decade now, we take that tube of the stem cells in the bottom, and you can hand it to a, wait for it, cardiologist. Plastic surgeon can hand the stem cells from fat to a cardiologist who will then load it up, inject it into your heart. And for people who have heart disease, and what we've seen, it'll grow new blood vessels, it'll grow new heart tissue. You can take people who are cardiac cripples and regenerate parts of their heart function. Amazing. And in my book, not ready for prime time yet, but it's part of the research that's going on. And in my book, I read about an even more amazing application. And that is that these stem cells are context dependent, meaning that they will turn into whatever is around them and what they feel like turning into. So when they're in fat, they're more likely to turn into fat. When they're in the heart, they'll turn into heart tissue. So and it turns out they'll also turn into nerve tissue as well. Okay, so I read about a case about a 30-year-old young man who actually fell off a ladder and he broke his neck and became a quadriplegic, could not move his arms and legs, wheelchair bound, horrible in a young person. And he volunteered into a clinical trial in which plastic surgeons took his body fat, spun it down, got the stem cells, handed the stem cells to a neurologist who injected the stem cells into his severed spinal cord. And guess what? It grew back spinal cord. And before long, he could move his arms and legs again, which is, like that's jaw dropping that these stem cells are so powerful. So back to fat stem cells in fat. Turns out there are certain foods that we can eat that can also redirect our fat stem cells, these adipose stromal cells, to say, you know what? Don't make any more white fat. Don't make any more fuel tanks. All right. Why don't you go make some more brown fat instead? What are some of the foods that can actually do this? It turns out tomatoes with lycopene can redirect stem cells to turn into from white fat into brown fat. So you can make more of the space heater function. That is really, really cool because we want more of that, right? We want more, we want more power. It's like more ammo to be able to burn down an extra afterburner, on a racing car to be able to actually burn down more of the harmful extra fuel stored in our white fat. Another food that can actually do this, brassica. So broccoli has got is one of the brassicas, has sulforaphane, but guess what? So does Swiss chard. So does bok choy. This whole family of foods have sulforaphanes that when you eat them, actually can help to redirect your stem cells to say, hey, buddy, don't make any more white fat. We don't want that. We want you to make more brown fat because it's time to burn down some harmful fat.
All right, so we can stimulate brown fat with certain foods. We can use other foods to stimulate stem cells that are going to make more brown fat that can be stimulated. How do we assess how much brown fat we have, or is that even of concern?
Okay, so brown fat is invisible to us because it's close to the bone. It's paper thin. And you just know that it's there. Like that is our birthright to have some brown fat. We do know that cold temperatures, when we're out in the cold, in the wintertime, for example, or people who live in cold climates but work outdoors, like lumberjacks working in Scandinavia, the cold temperature actually stimulates brown fat and it generates warmth. Probably brown fat keeps our insides warm. That's what it does for animals that hibernate, these little like woodchucks and those animals that actually have to fire up, or bats. The brown fat keeps them warm for cold temperatures. But certain foods will also stimulate the brown fat, and it improves the metabolism. And I'll tell you how we know in the medical research community that brown fat exists and how we measure it. Okay. So I got to tell you a story. And the story is that in the 17th century, there was a researched a biologist, a naturalist who studies, animals and things, plants and animals, named Conrad Gessner, and he was collecting little squirrel-like animals that lived in the Eastern European mountains, and he was dissecting them and drawing pictures of their organs, and he found this thing between their shoulder blades. It was this brown lump, and he didn't know what it was would do to, but he thought, it was bigger in animals that were hibernating, so he called it a hibernoma. Like, he didn't know what it was. He thought it was an organ. Okay, it is an organ. Fast forward, into the 18th and 19th century, and even into the earliest 20th century, other researchers found that, yeah, you know what? Other animals that hibernate actually have this little brown lump between their back. Fast forward into like mid 20th century, the 1960s, a UCLA researcher. By then, we had the microscopes that were powerful enough to look deep down into this lump. He said, wait a minute, that is actually fat. But it's not white fat, wiggly jiggly fat. It's brown. It's brown colored. Why is it brown? Well, it turns out that the nuclear energy that turns on this space heater, the furnace, actually is an organelle in our body called the mitochondria. And when I was in medical school, I used to memorize things, right? So mitochondria, I called it mitochondria. It is mighty. It's small but mighty. It generates a lot of heat. And because mitochondria, which is a natural suborgan of our cells, actually are loaded with iron. And iron, like rust, is brown. So when you have a lot of this nuclear engine, the furnace, with a lot of iron in it, it makes the tissue brown. Brown fat has a lot of mitochondria, this space heating function. Now it starts to make sense. So they looked in people. They're like, animals have it. What about people? People, like maybe babies have it. So they found that there's a lump between a baby, between her shoulder blades, that actually is brown fat. And then they thought, well, humans aren't born in the wild anymore, on a cave floor. They don't need that. We put them in incubators if they need heat. And we grow up with thermostats and things like that. So must be vestigial, like your appendix or like your tonsils. Well, we know for sure, that the tonsils and your appendix are not vestigial by any means. They're important parts they harbor our gut microbiome. They're important parts of our defense. All right. And by the same token, brown fat is present not only in babies, but in adults. Now, how do we find it in adults? This is an interesting story. In the 90s, there was actually it was a patient that came to a Boston hospital who had a tumor in her chest. And right at the time, they had these scanning devices called PET scans, positron emission tomography. And when you do a PET scan, it's kind of like a CT scan or an MRI or an X-ray. It takes a picture of your body, but it doesn't take a detailed picture. What it does is it measures metabolism. It shows you what parts of your body have higher metabolism. And when they took a PET scan of this one with a tumor in her chest, that tumor, that ominous area in her chest, lit up like a Christmas tree. And like, oh my God, that thing is super metabolically active. When they biopsied it, they were expecting to find a cancer. And what did they find? Brown fat. And they're like, wait, this isn't a cancer. It is brown fat. And that led one of the researchers in Boston to say, I wonder if PET scans are actually able to find brown fat in adults. So he went back into the medical records and pulled out 1,000 PET scans from patients that actually had PET scans for lots of different reasons in the past, and looked at them all. And what he found is that some people had brown fat, some people didn't. And he was like, you know what? It's all over the map. We can't make any sense of it. But then he had this inspired idea. Going back to the hibernating animals, he said, let me check the weather forecast on the day each of these scans were done. And what he found out was on every scan that had brown fat lighting up around the neck, behind the breastbone, under the arms, and the back, and a little bit belly, like I told you where it normally is, it was a cold day, especially in the winter. So people who are getting their scans, PET scans for whatever reason, you can measure your brown fat. It lights up in a PET scan that captures the metabolism. So remember, brown fat activates your metabolism. It fires up. You can see it on the PET scan, and that's how we discovered, and that's how we know brown fat is actually activated. Can you find it like a consumer? Like, is there a way of biohacking your way to measure a brown fat? Not yet. However, there are devices that are being developed. Like there's one that I've been playing around with. That's like a breathalyzer for metabolism that actually shows you that you're burning fat. So that's kind of a surrogate. And what I think is going to be really interesting is as our grasp of new human metabolism starts to become even more well defined, we're certainly going to be able to find a way to measure brown fat.
And where that gets really interesting is when you start stacking the two. You talked about, the foods that we can take in that are going to stimulate brown fat, but then you mix that in with taking an ice bath or a cold shower. I wonder, is there any research you know of where people are stacking that together and getting an even greater benefit?
That's what's going on right now. There's the kind of research. I mean, now that we know there's brown fat there, now that we know that cold temperatures can activate it and your metabolism and foods can activate it, that's the next step. I mean, look, I'm a researcher, so as much as I would like to say everything is done and we can just gift wrap and put a bow on it and people can buy it online, I can tell you the exciting part for me is that we finally know that there's a path forward for people that have been struggling with their weight and cycling up and down through crazy extreme diets that, you know what, maybe we don't need to be dependent and grasping at straws anymore. What the science of the new science of your metabolism is telling us that there's a path forward. Our operating system for our metabolism is already hardwired into us. And if we actually just start tweaking it and respecting what our body is capable of doing, maybe we can actually achieve these goals. We can achieve these goals. Higher metabolism, less body fat, elevated health, without having to resort to these extreme diets, which is why, by the way, I put in my book title, Eat to Beat Your Diet. It's not a diet book. That's a trick title. It's actually an anti-diet book to show how our hardwiring allows us to achieve health goals without having to go on a diet.
All right, so we know now brown fat, there's no technology to detect the amount we have, but we know how we can stimulate it or make more of it. What about the visceral fat? When you talked about that earlier, you talked about the fact that somebody can look like they're maintaining a healthy weight, but still have a problem going on inside. And you mentioned something about strangling from the inside. So obviously we know this isn't a good thing. And for somebody who is going to adopt a lot of what we talk about today, what I'm curious about, is there a way to get a baseline to see how much visceral fat we're at in the beginning, and then hopefully take on, like I said, some we're going to talk about today and burn that away and get to a healthier visceral fat level? Because I'm assuming, and you can add this in too, is everybody must have some visceral fat, even if they're in a healthy range, correct?
That's right. That's right. I mean, look, remember, I told you that we started to actually build healthy levels of fat as an organ in our body from the time we were in the womb. We want some white fat, we want some brown fat. The fat actually has a lot of functions. It's a cushion, it's a fuel tank, it's a space heater, it's an endocrine organ that makes hormones. So we want to have a little bit of this. Fat is not to be feared, it's to be respected. However, what we need to, so you don't want to get rid of all your fat, okay? You don't want to burn it, churn it, poison it. What you want to do is to tame it, right? And that's what's really important. And I think that's the whole idea. We want the fat to be something that's in harmony, in balance throughout our body. So there's brown fat, there's white fat. Within white fat, there's the stuff you can see, the wiggly jiggly stuff under your arm and under your jaw, the muffin top. All right. The visceral fat is of the two types of white fat, the subcutaneous and visceral. Visceral, the stuff inside your body cavity, inside your tube, the body tube, is the most dangerous thing. Now, why is that? Because visceral fat literally is the first fat to grow when you actually start to have too much fuel from too much food. Okay, it starts to grow, and because your body cavity is like a finite chamber. All right, that's when think about visceral fat normally like packing peanuts. You go to FedEx, you get a box, you're going to ship some champagne glasses. You're going to ask for some peanuts to make sure like it's padded so it's not going to break. You pour those peanuts in there loosely. You tape it up and you ship it off. It'll be fine. But let's say you were, aggressive and you're like, put the peanuts in. You got to keep on packing the peanuts. I bought that whole bag of peanuts. I'm going to use all the peanuts into this box. Now this box actually is like bulging with peanuts. And in fact, the peanuts are so packed in there that they're crushing the champagne glasses, for example. You're going to force the box shut, tape it, and at arm's length is still a skinny box. But guess what's in there? Those peanuts are actually choking your whatever you're shipping. Same deal when visceral fat grows to too aggressively, it becomes that baseball glove to strangle your organs. Now, how do you know that you have growing visceral fat? There's a couple of ways. One, it's kind of obvious. Your waist circumference expands. Your belt, you suddenly need a bigger size pant. The old clothes don't fit so well. All right. This is kind of like also the beer gut. All right. You wind up actually having bigger and bigger circumference. The tube of your body gets bigger because the fat inside, the peanuts in there, are stretching your skin. All right. So how can you tell when you're actually losing visceral fat? Very easy. You can actually close down an extra belt hole. You're getting smaller. Another pants fit better. That's like a surrogate, simple, easy peasy way to know if you're losing visceral fat. Now, you can actually get more sophisticated. You can do a DEXA scan, right? That's a scan that actually measures body composition, how much is muscle, how much is bone, how much is body fat, and a DEXA scan, which is pretty sophisticated. But people can get a DEXA scan, like fitness experts do that. You can actually measure exactly how much visceral fat you have, and you can do that over time to see if you're losing any of it. But for most people who don't want to go to that trouble, your belt size, your waistline, your clothing is actually a really, really good surrogate. So this is where, when I was talking about eating the beans and the research showing that you can lose one belt hole, like that's an inch. That's pretty amazing that just eating beans can actually do that.
I'm glad you clarified. Where I got confused, I was thinking of subcutaneous white fat as a separate silo from visceral fat. You explained there that white fat has basically, it splits off into the two, the subcutaneous and the visceral. So now that makes a lot more sense. So thank you for simplifying.
You got fat, you got brown, and you've got white. And of the white, you've got two kinds. You've got visceral, which is gut fat, and you've got subcutaneous, wiggly jiggly fat. All right. Now, one thing I was meaning to get to, that this is another really important thing. Do you know where's one of the first places you gain when you're gaining body fat, gaining weight? Do you know where one of the first places in your body that the fat actually accumulates? Where do you think that might be?
I would guess the belly.
Right? That's what most people think, because that's what you can see. My belly's getting bigger, I must be gaining weight. Not true. It turns out one of the most sensitive places that you start to gain body fat as you're gaining weight, and this is true in skinny people as well as big people, larger sized body people, is your tongue. Your tongue gets fat. You can get a fat tongue. Now, here's how it works. And this has been studied by people who look at anatomy of the tongue. So the tongue actually has three parts. The tip of the tongue is like Cirque du Soleil. It's like an acrobat. It can do all kinds of fancy things at the very tip. The middle of the tongue is muscular, okay? It is super strong and muscular because it moves food around in your mouth, okay? The back of the tongue is kind of like a big beanbag, and it is marbled with fat, visceral fat, like a ribeye steak. That's normal, healthy. That's the way the tongue is actually made. So when you actually start to gain visceral fat, one of the first places that the visceral fat starts to grow is in the back third of your tongue. Now, how do we know this? This has actually been studied in skinny people, in fact, skinny women. And what happens is that people notice that, usually it's the bed partners that say this, that, hey, you know what? You started snoring. Did you know that? You weren't snoring before. Now you're snoring. And the person goes, you know what? Actually, that's really weird because I'm starting to gain a little bit of weight too. And so this is the connection. When you're growing more body fat, your tongue gets fatter in the back of your tongue. And what happens is, think about it. When you're sleeping, you're relaxed. And when you're relaxed, your tongue is also relaxed. And your fat tongue starts to slide back and block your airways. Now you snort. You don't sleep that well. It's called sleep apnea. And you actually snore as well. So snoring is another biomarker of accumulating extra visceral fat in the back of your tongue that actually is indicating that you're actually starting to gain weight and gain body fat.
That's so interesting. And while we're talking about the different types of fat here, one more area I want to dive into. We know we can take certain foods in. They're going to impact stem cells and convert the white fat to the brown fat. You talk about a term in the book, browning of fat. Is that different, or is that involve the stem cells?
It's different. It turns out that there are some foods that can also take white, jiggly, subcutaneous, or visceral fat. And the natural chemicals in the foods can basically tap the white fat in the shoulder and go, hey, buddy, you know what, white fat? I'm going to try to convert you to being the good fat, the good brown fat. And so white, the color between white and brown is beige. And so they call that beiging. So certain foods can even convince some of your white fat to turn brown like, so that fat that was once wiggly and jiggly in a fuel tank can start to become fuel burning as well. And this is how powerful foods can be. They elevate your metabolism by burning down fuel, by making more of the mitochondria fat, loaded fat that can burn down fuel, by convincing stem cells to make more of that good kind of fat, and by even convincing the wiggly jiggly harmful fat to actually also become more of that good fat as well. This is really untapped human potential, literally, that is baked into our bodies as part of our operating system. And when you realize that foods that we eat can activate the different parts of these systems, you realize that, wait a minute, we don't need to fear our food. We should think about which foods can actually do this. And that all of a sudden really turns the tables on this idea of dieting by deprivation. Now, why don't we set the table and decide what dishes we're actually going to put in front of us with using ingredients that can do that?
Well, let's attack weight loss from a whole different area now. And this is angiogenesis, an area that you're definitely an expert in. And this ties back to a lot of our previous conversations where there's certain foods that can affect blood vessels, either to create more or to lessen and prevent the creation of new vessels. And the reason why this is important, in the past, we've talked about it from a cancer perspective, but tying it into our new topic of metabolism and weight loss, fat as an organ needs a blood supply.
That's
so
right.
If we can attack that blood supply, we can attack weight loss from that angle. So I'll have you take that and explain in greater detail what I was getting at there.
Okay. Every normal, healthy organ in your body requires a blood supply, including your heart, your kidneys, your liver, and your body fat. Remember, body fat's normal, healthy organ in your body. You need some blood supply. But when fat starts to grow excessively, too much fat starts to grow because you've overeaten. Now you need to clone and stem cells need to make more fat cells to fill up and load up with fuel. And now you haven't finished loading up it. You need another fuel tank. Now you're going to clone it again with more stem cells. Now you got another one. Keep on adding up that copy pasting of the fuel cells of body fat, of fat cells, and now you've got a mound of fat that has outgrown the original fat that is healthy. Now, just like a tumor, when it actually starts to expand abnormally, it requires a blood supply in order to really support its bigger size. So too does fat need a blood supply to go beyond what it normally wants to have. Now, this is actually where, when you expand your body fat, excessive body fat, your fat is desperately growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and it needs more blood supply. So it's whipping around trying to grow new blood vessels. Usually it grows faster than the blood vessels can actually feed it before, the angiogenesis, the growth of blood vessels isn't fast enough. And so the center of this expanding fat starts to die. It doesn't have enough blood vessels. And so when fat, like a tumor, this happens in a tumor as well. So in a tumor, when the center of the tumor doesn't get enough blood vessels, because enough blood flow, because its tumor's expanding too large, what happens is that kind of necrotic or like a kind of rotting center, dying center, suddenly attracts inflammatory cells. It becomes very inflammatory. And the inflammation in both tumors and fat actually isn't just stuck in the mass, expanding mass. It leaks out, and now you've got inflammation spilling out from your growing fat everywhere in your body. And as we know, inflammation in the body is very helpful when you have it in small amounts in the right place at the right time. Then it goes away. But if you have chronic leaking, overflowing inflammation in your body that goes everywhere, now it's a setup for autoimmune disease, diabetes, for cancer, heart disease, vision loss, Alzheimer's, all kinds of really harmful conditions associated with inflammation, which we know is so important. So one of the things that is actually interesting, that we're tearing a page from the playbook of cancer medicine. So in cancer, you can actually give medicines that can cut off the blood supply to tumors. There are foods that can do the same thing. And so what's really interesting is there are certain foods that can help tame excessive body fat, that can cut off the blood supply prevent the tumors from getting bigger and bigger just because they don't have enough oxygen. Eventually, they're going to start to shrink. And that's an anti-angiogenic approach to body fat, to obesity. And that's been shown in the lab to work really well. When you take a look at the foods that actually are also useful for shrinking body fat and improving your metabolism, exactly the same foods that have anti-angiogenic, tumor-starving, and now fat-starving properties as well.
Let's come back to the microbiome piece, another defense system. We quickly touched on it before, but let's get really practical and specifically from a metabolism weight loss piece, what we want to do to support the microbiome and how the physiology works there.
Okay. Look, almost everyone who's interested in health and wellness has heard of the microbiome. Microbiome is gut bacteria. It's actually bacteria outside of our gut as well, but most of it's in our gut. And, a lot of people don't actually appreciate where in the gut the microbiome actually is located. It's in the last part of your gut in a little pouchy area in your colon called the cecum. That's spelled C-E-C-U-M. Most of our gut bacteria is actually found in that spot. It's kind of like the cave of the corridor of the microbiome. That's an ecosystem. And that ecosystem is composed of, somewhere about almost 39 trillion bacteria. Now, we know some of them, but there's more that we're discovering all the time. And by the way, it's not just bacteria. It's viruses, it's fungi. There's a lot of, there's archaea, there's a whole other species of organism that lives in our gut. But let's talk about bacteria for a second. We now know that certain bacteria activate our metabolism, all right? And when you're missing those bacteria, one of them is called Akkermansia muciniphila. When you're missing that healthy bacteria, what happens is your metabolism doesn't function properly. And so you're not drawing in energy the right way. Your fat starts to grow out of control. You're not even when you're eating regularly, you might not actually absorb all your energy efficiently. And so your blood sugars can rise. You develop metabolic syndrome. And so the lack of certain bacteria we know can be problematic. And there are certain foods that can grow back Akkermansia, like pomegranate juice, cranberry juice, Concord grape juice, for example, are ways to actually grow back and help nurture some of these bacteria. We also know, by the way, that when you have extra body fat, remember I told you that inflammation leaks out? I mean, think about like a garden hose. You're filling up a pot in your garden and you forget about it, and the water overflows the pot and now it's everywhere. It's got dirt everywhere as well. If your fat's inflammation spills out over the sides and leaks everywhere, very, very dangerous, by the way, that situation. It actually is that fat's poison in your blood, or it can poison your liver. That's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, leaking fat that poisons our organs, highly inflammatory situation, all right? It turns out that our gut microbiome, healthy gut microbiome, all right, not poisoned with too much sugar, artificial sweeteners, ultra-processed foods, all the things that sodas, things that really harm our gut microbiome. Your good, healthy, vibrant gut microbiome. If you have too much body fat and the inflammation leaks up, guess what? Your gut microbiome, which is a health defense system, lowers inflammation. It basically is like the fire department to help put out the inflammation, put out that fire. All right. If your gut microbiome is damaged, it can't put out that fire. And not only is your metabolism screwed up, all right, and your fat is starting to grow and mess up your metabolism further, but the inflammation is leaking out, and now you don't have the fire department to put out that fire.
So for somebody who feels like right now their microbiome is, all over the place and they've destroyed a lot of it living an unhealthy lifestyle, you mentioned the specific, I think you said cranberry juice, pomegranate juice, Concord grape juice when it comes to the Akkermansia. What do you recommend in a general sense to rebuild up that diversity of the microbiome to help tame inflammation as a whole?
Yeah, very important. And this is true for every aspect of your health, and it helps you resist virtually every type of disease that's known. And that is, take care of your gut microbiome like you would if you had a pet dog or a pet cat or a goldfish or a parakeet, which is that you've got to feed your critters. And the thing is that our gut microbiome is really part of who we are when we eat food. Every decision we make of the food we eat, our human bodies are going to absorb some of the nutrients, but anything that we don't absorb goes down to your cecum, part of your colon where your gut bacteria, and it feeds your gut bacteria. So you don't want to actually, you want to cut down or cut out the foods that actually harm your gut bacteria. Do not piss off. Do not chase away those good neighbors. You don't want to evacuate them from the neighborhood. You want to keep them there, and you want to keep them healthy, feel secure. So, what are the foods that actually harm them? Too much alcohol, sodas harm, ultra processed foods, ultra processed meats. Look, I mean, all the things that we already know that people are bludgeoning us over the head with that are not so healthy. We now know one of the reasons that they're not so healthy is they really kind of they damage our gut microbiome. So, more importantly, what are the foods that can restore that for somebody that goes, well, am I screwed because I've been messing with my gut microbiome's not so healthy? No way. We have really amazing resiliency to grow back a good neighborhood and get those good characters back in our neighborhood. So, what are some general principles of doing this? Well, one thing I'll tell you from a beverage perspective, what should I be drinking to help build back my gut microbiome? I call it in my book the holy trinity of beverages. These are the beverages that can really do no wrong in and of themselves. Water, okay, you can hydrate your gut microbiome, just like to be dried out. Tea, green tea, slightly fermented tea like oolong, black tea, even like an ultra fermented probiotic tea. There's actually a probiotic tea, which is cool, called Pu-erh, P-U apostrophe E-R-H. Pu-erh tea is an actual fermented tea that has its own tea bacteria. That's a healthy bacteria, good for your gut microbiome. Coffee, another great beverage that actually feeds your gut microbiome with its bioactives. These are all prebiotics that are found in these beverages. So, got to drink something rather than like swap out the soda and go for water, tea, or coffee. That's one way of actually starting to make a concrete step towards helping your gut microbiome recover. Second, as a general rule, your gut microbiome loves to eat fiber. The food you feed it, the kibble. Think about your dog, your pet dog. Whether it's dry food or wet food or raw food. Look, what gut bacteria likes, they like fiber, dietary fiber. Where do you get dietary fiber? Greens, salad greens, carrots, even mushrooms, soft things in the produce section also have dietary fiber. Kiwi, a great source of dietary fiber. Some of the softest vegetables you can find, avocado. Avocado's got a ton of dietary fiber. So it's not just stringy stuff that you have to pick out of your teeth or floss out of your teeth, but even an avocado. You do an avocado toast for breakfast, you're getting some dietary fiber. You are feeding your gut microbiome. And so anybody who's like, what can I do? I don't know. I must have screwed my gut microbiome. I don't feel so good. Look, first, cut down or cut out the things that are harming your microbiome. That's mostly the ultra processed foods and the sodas and all that kind of stuff. And start adding in some of the stuff that's good for you. And it's a lot of it. This is what I write about. I take people in my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, right through the grocery store as if you were like riding in a cart, like when you were a kid and you rode in the grocery cart and your mom pushed you along. In my book, I want people to realize that in that second section of my book, I invite you into the grocery cart and I take you through an average grocery store and literally just kind of kibitz and whisper in your ear what to put in a cart that can help your metabolism fight body fat and improve your inner health.
Dr. Lee, one of the common topics that comes up lately on the podcast when it comes to the microbiome is the short chain fatty acids. So feeding the gut microbiome, they're creating these short chain fatty acids. What I'm curious about is when it comes to those specifically, do they have a role in metabolism and weight loss?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me kind of give you an easy to understand analogy of dietary fiber feeding your healthy gut bacteria. Now, your gut bacteria need to eat, so you're feeding them the dietary fiber and other natural bioactives that are prebiotics. And the bacteria live in your colon. They live in your gut in that area called the cecum. So we, as humans, provide room, cecum, and board, prebiotics, to our gut bacteria, right? So we're basically landlords for our gut bacteria. And the rent they pay, okay, in exchange for being in our being borders in our body, is they pay us with short chain fatty acids. So when we feed them the right way, they hand us a check every single day, and that rent check, is actually called short chain fatty acids. It turns out those short chain fatty acids do a lot of the good stuff that the gut bacteria actually do. They streamline our metabolism, make our body more sensitive to insulin. They lowers inflammation, helps our body heal, sends signals to our brain. Short chain fatty acids are sort of they are the units to communicate. That's the currency that our gut microbiome gives us. And so, one thing that we're beginning to do is to realize that we can measure short chain fatty acids in the body. It's a medical thing so far, but eventually, what I'm excited by is this idea that we are not. We can start to. We already can do this. We can at least get a dipstick picture of what our gut microbiome is. You can get your stool microbiome measured. And in the future, we're going to start to take a look at short chain fatty acids and know how well we're doing.
Earlier, when we were talking about a specific strain, we mentioned Akkermansia when it comes to metabolism. Another one you mentioned in the book is Lactobacillus reuteri.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about why that one fits into this whole conversation. And you did give us specific examples of different drinks we could have to help grow the Akkermansia. What can we do to get the Lactobacillus reuteri going?
All right. Well, first of all, Lactobacillus reuteri. Lactobacillus is a very common type of normal, healthy gut bacteria, but it's pretty sensitive to antibiotics. And so Lactobacillus reuteri is just one member of the Lactobacillus family. It used to be present in all of us, and we used to get it from our moms, right? So basically, moms had Lactobacillus reuteri in her colon, and about 8 months into pregnancy, her uterus coordinates and sends a signal to her colon and says, hey, we're about a month away from delivering a baby. It's time to move some lactobacillus so the baby will have some lactobacillus. So that's how we got it. Now, it's amazing. There are these little blood cells called neutrophils. Now we know that these neutrophils go down to the colon at around 8 months. And they basically are like Ubers. And they pick up lactobacillus into the cell like an Uber driver, and the Uber driver moves from the colon and it navigates its way to the breast by the nipple, and it drops off the passenger, the lactobacillus, by the nipple. And so when the baby comes out and crawls up to the mom after some skin time to actually have the first suckle of milk, that used to be the point at which moms squirted some of her lactobacillus reuteri into the baby's gut. So generation after generation after generation, that's how we used to have it. Now, that was before about 1930 or 40. After 1930 or 40, the advent of antibiotics came into play, and babies were getting treated with antibiotics, and moms were getting treated with antibiotics, and antibiotics are life-saving. But one of the sort of the side effects, the collateral damage, is it kills off Lactobacillus reuteri. So now it's hard to know who has it and who doesn't have it because, gosh, we haven't been even thinking about this unintended consequence of treating infection with antibiotics, right? So overuse of antibiotics. Now here, even judicious use of antibiotics can damage that member of our gut microbiome. Why is that important? Because research I and other people have done has shown that Lactobacillus reuteri in the gut does a lot of really important things. One thing it does is it actually speeds up healing. You have surgery, you have trauma, like you cut yourself, you have a car accident, you fall off a bike, scrape your knee. Lactobacillus actually speeds up the healing in your body. In fact, it can double the rate of healing in your body when it's actually there in good form. Other thing it does is it actually helps us support your immune system. My gosh, who doesn't want to have a good immune system? You don't have any lactobacillus, you're going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to your immune system. Lactobacillus reuteri actually in the lab has been shown to resist the development of colon cancer and breast cancer. How about them apples? Like, oh my gosh, here's a bacteria that's been shown to resist the development. It's not a cure, but it actually helps your body defend against colon and breast cancer. Whoa, that's an important bacteria. And then the other thing that's even more profound to me is that Lactobacillus reuteri has been shown to text message your brain. You've heard about the gut-brain connection, right? People talk about that. Lactobacillus is one of the actors, the good actors, that text message your brain to release social hormones that control our mood. Lactobacillus helps our brain secrete dopamine, serotonin. I mean, all these things that psychiatrists and therapists prescribe drugs for, our gut bacteria writes that prescription invisibly, by sending a message to our brain. Our gut bacteria lactobacillus also helps our brain release a social hormone called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin happens to be that same hormone that when the baby comes out of the womb and has the first suckle on the nipple to breastfeed, there's a huge rush of oxytocin, not surprisingly, that goes whoosh. It helps your breast ducts, the milk ducts contract to squirt that milk and lactobacillus into the baby's gut. So that makes a lot of sense given the story I just told you. But oxytocin is also a feel-good hormone. So if you haven't seen a friend and you're picking him or her up at the airport and you see them coming out of the arrival gate and you run up to give them a hug and you feel great about it, that is oxytocin, that feeling, that feel-good. Another time oxytocin comes out, when you have a kiss, not just a peck on the cheek, but a good, deep French kiss. That incredible feeling, that's oxytocin being released from your brain. Another time you get oxytocin, when you have an orgasm. For a few seconds, this massive explosion of oxytocin comes surging out of your brain. That's how important lactobacillus is. Lactobacillus helps our brain secrete those natural mood-enhancing chemicals, right? Here we are talking about like mood enhancers and psychotropics, mushrooms and things like that. Here's actually a natural role that our gut bacteria plays, and Lactobacillus reuteri is one of them.
So if we've depleted that through, say, we haven't gotten breastfed as a kid and we never picked that up, or I think you mentioned antibiotics will destroy it. Is there certain foods that we can ingest to rebuild that up, or is there a supplement we can take, or what do we do?
So the good news is that there are supplements for Lactobacillus reuteri that you can take it. I actually take it. I take one of these every day. I'm not getting paid to endorse anything, but I can tell you because I did the research, and when I looked at that research, I'm like, holy cow! Like, why wouldn't I take that Lactobacillus reuteri supplement? The other reason I take it, and I take it at night after I brush my teeth, by the way, and I don't take the adult version, by the way. I take the children's chewable version, and when people realize I'm doing it, they're like, why would you want to do that, right? It turns out clinical trials have shown that this Lactobacillus reuteri actually is part of the oral mouth microbiome too, and it fights the bacteria that causes cavities. So for me, like you can take a dietary supplement, you can actually chew it up, rinse it out, rinse your mouth, get the bacteria in there, and then swallow it. Now you've actually 2 shots on goal, once to fight cavities and once for the rest of your body at the end of the evening. Now, but there are other dietary sources of Lactobacillus reuteri as well. Yogurt, some forms of yogurt actually have it. You have to kind of look around to see which types of yogurt actually have it. Sourdough bread, okay. The tangy sourness of sourdough bread, that delicious tangy feel, if you like sourdough bread. It's tangy, hence sourdough, actually because it's a lactic acid. That acid actually is what makes it tangy. And guess what? The starter for sourdough bread is Lactobacillus reuteri that makes lactic acid, and it secretes it into the dough. So when you bake it, you're actually getting Lactobacillus reuteri. And so that actually is another way of actually getting Lactobacillus reuteri. And then a lot of people don't know this. And I'm not saying that this is a health food. I'm just telling you this is a source of natural Lactobacillus reuteri. Parmesan cheese actually is made, the starter for Parmesan cheese is Lactobacillus reuteri. So that's kind of a cool thing if you're grating a little bit on your pasta or whatever it is. Now, obviously, and not just, by the way, not just any Parmesan cheese, Parmigiano Reggiano, the real Parmesan cheese, okay, from Italy. It's kind of pricey, but oh man, the flavor is amazing. And you don't need to eat a lot of it to really get this nice flavor, but that's actually made with Lactobacillus reuteri. So that's got probiotic type of food. Now, I always tell people when people say, well, wait a minute, are you telling me to eat cheese? I'm saying, no, not all cheeses are created equal. What I'm telling you, there are some cheeses that are actually probiotic cheeses that have some of the good stuff. You do have to watch out for cheese. It can be very salty, okay, and some people with high blood pressure need to worry about that. It can also have a lot of saturated fat, which isn't necessarily good for you. So you want to kind of control and lower the amount of saturated fat. But I'm just telling you, if you're going to reach for a block of cheese from time to time, and you want to know what kind of cheese I should use, I would say go for taste, go to Parmigiano Reggiano. For probiotic benefit and Lactobacillus reuteri specifically, go ahead. Cheese grate a little bit of that on your stuff. You're actually going to benefit your gut microbiome.
Throughout our conversation, we've tethered a lot of what we've been talking about to our previous chats through the 5 health defense systems. So far, we've talked specifically about angiogenesis, the microbiome, and regeneration with the stem cells. I know we have to part ways here in a few minutes, but I want to touch on the other two, starting with immunity. And this kind of ties into the visceral fat, not by function, but by proximity through the omentum.
Ah,
So let's talk about this special fat in the body and how it ties into immunity.
all right. Well, when I was a medical student, medical students don't know anything. We're there to absorb all the textbooks, and we go into the hospital and follow attending, teaching doctors or professors around, learning everything, and they're sharing with us the craft, right? It's like a trade. It's a trade. We're being apprenticed as medical students. I remember in surgery, we were operating on people that were both large, big body types, and just regular, normal, healthy body types, and some skinny people. And there was always one piece when you open up the belly, to do surgery in the gut. Most people don't know this, but when you're having your guts operated on, like they open you up and the surgeon actually moves the guts to the side, pull them out, move them off to the side of the table, or off a little bit to the side, and you could manipulate whatever you need to go do, and then you put it back. It's like unpacking a suitcase, right? You got to get something at the bottom. All right, you don't want to reach in, you'll destroy everything. So just carefully move things out, and then you actually put it back when you're done. But one of the things that we always saw that I could never forget, there was this thick, fingery piece of fatty tissue that's called the omentum, and it's tethered to the back of your belly, kind of by your spine, and it's got this incredible blood supply. And I used to tell my surgery professor, the first time I saw it, I'm like, "What is that?" And the surgeon told me that, my friend, future Dr. Lee, is called the omentum. And I'm like, "What the heck is omentum?" It is part of the body. It's made out of body fat, and it's called the policeman of the abdomen. And I'm like, "What do you mean, policeman of the abdomen?" This is it actually looks like a baseball glove, but it's actually the same in everybody. And it is actually packed with immune cells, and it crawls around like an octopus. Remember, I told you it's like got arms. Crawls around like your belly like an octopus, conducting surveillance, making sure that the gut, which is filled with this bacteria, and you're eating different foods are running through it. And if you had a perforation in your belly, like that'll kill you if you don't wall it off. And so this policeman of your abdomen literally is crawling around like an octopus, getting its little tentacles into all the little the twisted areas of your gut, making sure everything is cool. There's no perforations, there's no leakage, there's no infections, everything is good. When it sees that there's a problem, if you had a perforated gut, appendicitis, man, this policeman of the abdomen, this omentum, leaps into action. It goes right to where the perforation is, and it literally forms like a cup around that area where bacteria might be. It forms a cup around it to block it. The infection doesn't leak out anywhere. And then, just like the future Star Wars, it beams immune cells, inflammatory cells, right at that area of infection to clean it up. All right, that's why it's called the policeman of the abdomen. It patrols, it finds problems, it forms a barricade around it, and then it cleans up the problem. And then only when everything is calm and everything is all clear sign does the omentum go back and retract, and it goes back to its place normally going to look around. So that is an amazing thing that a lot of people don't recognize, that in addition to fat being the endocrine organ, there's a special part of the fat that's called the omentum that is like an octopus, and it's going around your belly, crawling around. Literally, it's moving around all day long, looking for trouble. And when it doesn't find it, you're happy. But when it finds it, it's life-saving.
That is so fascinating. And does it tie directly to metabolism, or is it more just an immune thing?
It probably ties back to metabolism, because we're beginning to now look at the links between the omentum and the gut microbiome and what role that plays as well. So listen, what's so exciting, Jesse, is that, and you hear me talking about this in a very excited way because I'm a scientist and I love discovery, and we are discovering more. about the healthy parts of our body fat, how to tame our body fat using food, using metabolism, using fasting, and how to actually, all this connects to our gut health, our heart health, our brain health, our emotional wellness, as well as our physical wellness, and the amount of energy that we actually have. And, people talk a lot about aging, right? Healthy aging is longevity is a big topic now, and for good reason. A good, healthy metabolism allows you to get to live long and prosper, as Mr. Spock used to say in Star Trek. It's very, very important. So all these pieces all fit together, and it's just that we never appreciated how important all these pieces were, and also we never appreciated how possible it is for us to be empowered and have the agency to be able to make decisions that can help our body do what it wants to do.
All right, so last defense system, the DNA protection. Let's tie this into metabolism.
All right. Well, we actually just talked about, I just mentioned aging. All right. And I want to just start right there, because as we age, our genetic code starts to kind of burn away and burn down. Think about it like a candle, right? You light a long dinner candle at the beginning of dinner. If you have a great dinner and it's like a long dinner date, and the candle burns all the way down, you're up all night. Like you have a late night dinner and the candle burns down. Well, at the bottom, like it lights out, and that's basically, we have a fuse like the candle wick in our DNA, and it's protected by something called the telomere. And our telomeres are these protective caps at the end of our DNA that burn down slowly as we age. The faster it burns down, the faster we age. And there are things that we do, like we don't live healthy lifestyles, we don't get enough sleep, we eat crappy food. That life fuse burns down, the protective cap burns down faster and faster and faster. And guess what? When it burns all the way down, our cells age really fast. So that's called cellular aging. So, and by the way, this is all DNA. So you want to protect your DNA, you want to slow down cellular aging. So it turns out, remember I told you that body fat can leak inflammation if it gets too big. All right. Normal body fat calms inflammation, but too much body fat leaks out the inflammation everywhere. When inflammation leaks out, you accelerate your cellular aging. It burns down these telomeres faster and faster and faster. And that's why you want to tame that body fat, because you want to slow down your cellular aging as much as you can possibly do it. Now, the other thing is that some of the foods that help to fight excess body fat also slow down cellular aging. So here's the connection right between protecting your DNA, helping you live longer and a more vital life, and giving you more energy while you're at it. That's directly connected to your DNA. That's directly connected to your body fat. That's connected to your metabolism. But there's other reasons also that's really, really important, which is that when you have excess body fat, now remember, what we want is balance. We want normal, healthy, balanced body fat. When you have too much of it, it's growing and growing and growing, and it doesn't have enough blood supply. It's kind of dying in the middle, so it's becoming very inflammatory, and the inflammation is leaking out. All right. Now what's happening is that kind of rotting fat, as it's kind of growing faster than this blood supply, leaks free radicals. Free radicals damage our DNA. So one of the things that we want to do is to tame our fat is we want to lower the oxidative stress caused by those free radicals in the rest of our body as well. So it's very important to know that when our fat is functioning well, it lowers inflammation, it slows down cellular aging, it helps us to, protect our oxidative status in our body. When we have extra body fat, it completely undoes all those protective things. And that makes our DNA much more vulnerable. Now, our DNA, by the way, it's not just a genetic code. It protects us from harms in the environment because it can fix itself. Radon from the ground, ultraviolet radiation from the sun, not just sunburn or sun tanning booth, but even like, what you get in a car window when you're stuck in traffic. Or if you're in an airplane and you have the window open, that ultraviolet radiation is coming in and frying your DNA on one side of your body. Thank goodness your DNA can fix itself. So you don't want to compromise that DNA's ability. And body fat and metabolism is intricately connected to that.
Dr. Lee, really enjoyed the conversation. We're going to link up the new book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, and we're going to link up your social media, your website, everything in the show notes. So thank you for coming back on the show.
Thanks very much, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
Now that you're done my conversation with Dr. Lee, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my deep dive with Dr. Jason Fung. He's got a lot more to share about weight loss, so you're going to love it. I'll see you over there.
From a scientific mathematical standpoint, it's actually very, very obvious what needs to be done. You need to change the hormones.